The first time I really knew, deep in the marrow of my bones where fear and fury crystallized into something colder, harder, was a Tuesday. Rain lashed against the kitchen window of Gran's old Victorian, the kind of steady, gray drizzle that seeped into everything, mirroring the damp dread settling in my gut. I was rummaging in the pantry for her favorite Earl Grey, the fancy loose-leaf kind, because Grandmother Lilly had standards, even at 83 when I knocked over the big ceramic flour jar she kept on the top shelf. It wasn't flour. It was pills. Not just any pills. Cardboard boxes, dozens of them, pristine blister packs gleaming under the pantry light. Metformin, lisinopril, atorvastatin, the precise cocktail that kept my grandmother's heart ticking, her blood pressure from spiking, her cholesterol from gumming up the works. The medication I knew she took religiously every morning with her toast and weak coffee. The medication dispensed monthly in neat, labeled bottles from the pharmacy downtown. These weren't in bottles. These were bulk, hidden, stashed away like contraband. My fingers went numb. The world narrowed to the rain's drumming and the stark white of those boxes. I fumbled one open, popping a pill from its foil nest. It looked right. Same shape, same color as the ones in her little weekly pill organizer on the kitchen counter. But Gran Lilly hadn't just been any retiree puttering in her garden. Before arthritis bent her fingers and time softened her edges, she'd been Dr. Lillian Vance, PhD, a research chemist whose work on polymer coatings had quietly revolutionized half a dozen industries. She knew compounds like most grandmothers knew cookie recipes. And she'd taught me, her only grandson who bothered to listen, a thing or two. This pill felt wrong. Too light. Too crumbly between my fingers, not with the slight waxy give of the genuine article. I crushed a corner between my thumbnails. Instead of the faint, bitter pharmaceutical tang, it yielded a chalky, bland dust. Placebo. A damn good fake, visually identical, but inert. Worthless. A sugar pill masquerading as life support. The air left my lungs in a whoosh, cold and sharp. Dad. It could only be Dad. Uncle Martin lived 3 states away, barely called. Aunt Claire, well, Claire had her own problems. But Dad lived 10 minutes away. Dad managed Gran's finances since Grandpa passed. Dad drove her to appointments, picked up her prescriptions. Dad was always there, hovering, with that avaricious glint in his eyes that intensified whenever he looked at the old house, the antique silver, the rumored but never discussed value of Gran's long-held patents. Dad, who complained loudly about the cost of her care, the burden, the inconvenience. He wasn't just skimming funds. He was trying to hasten the inevitable, cutting her life short, penny by pharmaceutical penny, hoping nature would take its course faster without the chemical buffers holding it back. Murder by neglect. Murder by substitution. Slow, insidious, and utterly, chillingly plausible. Rage, white-hot and blinding, surged through me. I wanted to storm into his sterile McMansion, smash those smug, calculating features. I wanted to scream at Gran, warn her, bundle her up and drive her far away. But the rage hit a wall of pure, paralyzing fear. Accuse him. With what? My word against his. Head spin it, I was confused. I was overreacting. Gran was forgetful. Maybe she misplaced her real meds. Had charmed the doctors, the lawyers. Had cut me off from her faster than I could blink. And what would it do to Gran? The betrayal, it would shatter her fragile world. It might kill her faster than the placebos. I stood there in the gloom of the pantry, rain blurring the window, the fake pills gritty in my palm, feeling utterly helpless. A pawn in a game I hadn't chosen, watching a slow-motion atrocity unfold. That's when I heard the soft shuffle of slippers on linoleum. Michael, you getting lost in there, love? The kettle's singing its heart out. I slammed the pantry door shut, leaning against it, trying to force my breathing steady, my face neutral. When I turned, Gran Lilly stood in the kitchen doorway, dwarfed by her worn cardigan, her cloud of white hair catching the weak light. Her eyes, though faded from the sharp blue of her youth, still held that unnerving clarity. They swept over me, missing nothing the pallor I couldn't hide, the tremor in my hand as I clutched the box of Earl Grey. Found it, I croaked, holding up the tea. Just took a minute. Dusty in there. She smiled, a gentle curve of lips that had comforted me through skinned knees and broken hearts. Everything gathers, dust eventually, dear. Even us. She moved slowly towards the counter towards her pill organizer. It was Wednesday. Little compartment marked AM. She picked out the small white disc, the fake lisinopril, and placed it calmly on her tongue. She reached for the glass of water I hadn't poured yet. My heart hammered against my ribs. Don't swallow it. Spit it out. He's killing you. The words choked me. I poured the water, hand shaking so badly it slopped over the rim. She took the glass, sipped, swallowed. The fake pill, the catalyst for her death, gone. There, she sighed, patting her chest lightly. All set for the day. Now, about that tea. I made the tea. Mechanically. Boiling water, warmed pot, precise 3 minutes deep. Gran settled at the worn oak table, the one where she'd helped me with chemistry homework, where Grandpa had carved his initials decades ago. She watched me, silent for a long moment, stirring her tea with a tiny silver spoon that had belonged to her grandmother. You look peaky, Michael, she said finally, her voice soft but carrying that undercurrent of steel I remembered from childhood lectures about lab safety. Trouble at work. Or something else. The kindness in her voice, the genuine concern, was a knife twist. How could I tell her? How could I shatter the fragile piece of her final years? The helplessness morphed into a sickening despair. I was failing her. Utterly failing her. Just tired, Gran, I mumbled, staring into my own cup. Long week. She reached across the table, her thin, cool hand covering mine where it gripped the mug. Her skin was papery, veins like faded blue rivers under the surface. But her grip, surprisingly, was firm. You've always been a terrible liar, my boy. Almost as bad as your father. Her gaze held mine, steady and blinking. But worrying has a different weight. It settles in the shoulders, in the eyes. She paused, her thumb rubbing a small circle on my knuckle. You found something. In the pantry. I froze. My mouth went dry as the fake pill dust. She knew. How long had she known? The world tilted. Her expression didn't change. No shock. No anger. Just that deep, unnerving calm. Calcium carbonate, she said, her tone conversational, almost academic, with a touch of maize starch and magnesium stearate for binding. Passably similar visually to the genuine formulations, wouldn't you say? Especially to the untrained eye, or the uncaring one. The clinical detachment in her voice was terrifying. Gran? It was barely a whisper. She withdrew her hand, picking up her teacup. She took a slow, deliberate sip. He started about 6 months ago. The metformin first. I noticed the lack of effect. The subtle shift in my blood sugar readings he thought I wouldn't track. Then the lisinopril. The dizziness upon standing became more pronounced. The atorvastatin, well, the body complains less obviously about that, but the fatigue she set the cup down with a precise click. Hay's become quite proficient at the switch. Times it for when I'm napping, or when he helps me sort my weekly doses. Such a thoughtful son. The bitterness was there, laced with a profound, weary sadness, but it was buried deep beneath the icy surface of her composure. It was the calm of a scientist observing a disastrous, inevitable reaction. Why? The word burst out of me raw and ragged. Why haven't you stopped him? Called the police? Told someone? Her pale blue eyes met mine. And achieve what, Michael? A scandal. A protracted legal battle that would drain what resources he hasn't already siphoned. Watching him twist and lie and play the victim. Dragging my name, your grandfather's name, through the mud. Subjecting myself to doctors' prying, lawyers' questions, the pitying stares. She shook her head slowly. No, that is not the exit I choose. I lived my life with dignity. I intend to leave it the same way. On my terms. A cold dread, deeper than anything it felt finding the pills, seeped into me. Your terms? A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. Your father underestimates me, Michael. He always has. He sees the old woman in the cardigan, the slow gait, the fading eyesight. He forgets the decades spent in laboratories, understanding the intimate dance of molecules, the precise mechanisms of action and reaction. He forgets I know how things work, how they break, how they persist. She pushed her chair back slowly, the legs scraping softly on the linoleum. Help me up, dear. There's something I need to show you. Downstairs. Downstairs meant the basement. Not the damp, cluttered storage most old houses had, but Gran's preserved domain, her private laboratory. A relic from her active research days, meticulously maintained, though rarely used openly in recent years. Dad thought it was just old equipment gathering dust, another thing to eventually clear out. He never went down there. Too musty, he said. Too many weird smells. I followed her, my legs feeling like lead, down the creaking wooden stairs. The air changed halfway down cooler, carrying the familiar, complex scent I associated with Gran's essence, old paper, dried herbs from her gardening phase, and beneath it, the sharper, cleaner notes of solvents and chemicals acetone, ethanol, something vaguely phenolic. The single bare bulb flickered on as she pulled the cord, illuminating a space frozen in time. Neat shelves lined with glass jars containing powders and crystals in muted colors. An old but spotless fume hood. A heavy oak workbench scarred by decades of use, bearing calibrated scales, glass beakers, condensers, a microscope shrouded in plastic. Orderly, precise, potent. Gran moved with a purpose that belied her usual fragility. She went straight to a locked cabinet beside the workbench, producing a small brass key from a chain around her neck. Inside weren't dusty relics, but neatly labeled vials, small containers of reagents, a modern digital scale, boxes of sterile gloves. This wasn't a museum. It was a functioning, if small-scale, lab. She selected a small amber glass vial, tightly sealed with a teat-fail-lined cap. Inside was maybe half a teaspoon of a fine, crystalline powder. It looked innocuous, like finely ground salt or sugar. Colorless. She held it up to the light. Telluric telluride, she said, her voice low and resonant in the quiet basement. T2. Synthesized it myself years ago. Fascinating compound. Highly insoluble. Remarkably stable under physiological conditions until it's not. My blood ran cold. Gran, what is it? Poison. She gave a small, dismissive click of her tongue. Such a crude term. It's an element, Michael. Tellurium. Essential in trace amounts for some organisms, toxic in excess. Like many things. She placed the vial carefully on the worn wood of the bench. Its toxicity, however, is exquisitely delayed. And its method of elimination is unique. She turned to face me fully, the dim light carving deep shadows in her face, making her eyes seem even brighter, sharper. Orally ingested, T2 is poorly absorbed. Most passes through the gut unchanged, but a small fraction of very specific, predictable fraction is absorbed. It doesn't accumulate in the organs like lead or mercury. It doesn't cause acute symptoms. It binds very loosely, very temporarily, to certain plasma proteins. Then, over weeks, it is slowly excreted. Excreted how? The question felt thick in my throat. Primarily through the sebaceous glands, she said, her tone utterly clinical. In sweat, and significantly in the volatile organic compounds emitted by the skin, particularly from the scalp, the palms. It forms organotellurium complexes, odorless, invisible, but remarkably persistent on surfaces, fabrics with skin. She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the chemical-scented air. It requires prolonged, repeated contact for significant transdermal absorption in another individual. Weeks, months, but once absorbed tellurium is tenacious. It inhibits key mitochondrial enzymes. Slowly. Irreversibly. Symptoms mimic natural decline, fatigue, peripheral neuropathy, cardiac arrhythmias culminating in multi-system organ failure, and traceable to its source, especially if the source is deceased. Natural causes. The pieces slammed together with brutal, horrifying clarity. The placebos. Her taking them, knowingly playing along. And this slow, cold, meticulously planned counterstroke. My stomach lurched. I gripped the edge of the workbench to steady myself. You're taking this. I managed to choke out, staring at the innocuous-looking vial. A minuscule dose, she confirmed, her voice devoid of any tremor. Daily, mixed into my morning oatmeal. Has been for the past 3 months. Since I confirmed his pattern beyond doubt. She picked up the vial again, turning it slowly in her fingers. It's calibrated, Michael. Precisely. Based on my body weight, my estimated remaining lifespan without the correct medication, my metabolic rate. The accumulation in my system is building steadily, predictably. And the excretion, it has already begun. The image was grotesque. My vibrant, brilliant grandmother systematically turning her own body into a poison time capsule. Every hug, every time Dad patted her hand, every time he riffled through her drawers looking for bank books or jewelry after she was gone, had me picking up invisible, deadly dust. Hell touch you, I whispered, horror making my voice crack. Hell handle your things after exactly, she said, her gaze unwavering. He will be the dutiful son, won't he? Sorting my clothes for donation, packing away my trinkets, sitting at this very table, going through papers, breathing the dust in this house, this room, saturated with my presence, my leavings. She placed the vial back in the cabinet and locked it with a decisive click. He will absorb it through his skin, inhale it, day after day, week after week, and months from now, perhaps a year, when he starts feeling inexplicably tired, when his hands start to tingle, when his heart skips a beat, no one will connect it to me. A grieving son, working too hard, stressed by the inheritance, it's tragically common. The timeline is perfect. The mechanism is elegant. Elegant. She called it elegant. The cold precision of it was monstrous. And yet looking at her face, seeing not malice, but a profound, exhausted resolve, a terrible justice, I understood. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was the calculated verdict of a life betrayed, delivered with the only weapons left to her, her intellect and her own mortality. You can't, Gran, I pleaded, though I knew it was futile. The plan was in motion. The wheels were turning. It's what he deserves, Michael, she said quietly, turning away from the cabinet. He chose to play God with my life, to shorten it for profit. I am merely ensuring his own actions bear their ultimate consequence. A consequence deferred, but inescapable. She walked towards the stairs, her steps slow but steady. Now help me back upstairs, dear. I believe my oatmeal is getting cold, and we wouldn't want to waste it. The following months were a slow descent into a gilded hell. Knowing, always knowing. Watching Dad play the concerned son, his solicitousness now a grotesque pantomime that made my skin crawl. Watching Gran play the slightly forgetful, increasingly frail old lady, accepting his help with a serene smile that hid an ocean of glacial fury. She took her placebos without a flicker. She ate her oatmeal. She grew thinner, paler. The real decline, accelerated by the lack of proper medication, began to manifest. The dizziness worsened. Her breath shortened on the stairs. Her hands trembled constantly now. I became her confidant, her silent accomplice. I learned the routine. I bought the specific brand of plain oatmeal. I watched her measure the minuscule, nearly invisible amount of tea to crystals on her jeweler's scale before stirring them in. I disposed of the contaminated dishes with meticulous care, wearing gloves she provided, using the special solvent she kept under the sink to wipe down surfaces. My role was containment, ensuring the poison stayed targeted, protecting myself, protecting anyone else innocent who might visit. The guilt was corrosive, a constant acid drip in my soul. I was complicit in premeditated murder. Yet, the sight of Dad, his voice dripping with false concern while his eyes darted around the room appraising the value of her Waterford crystal or the Persian rug, fueled a dark, vindictive part of me that whispered Gran was right. This was justice. Slow, cold, and utterly inescapable. Conversations became minefields. One afternoon, Dad was helping Gran review her will again. He sat too close at the dining table, his hand resting possessively on the leather binder. Gran coughed a dry, rattling sound that had become frequent. Dad patted her back, his fingers lingering on the thin wool of her cardigan. There, mother. Just a tickle. See, Michael? She needs constant attention. It's a good thing I'm here so often. His tone was cloying. I saw the fleeting tightening around Gran's eyes before the serene mask slipped back on. Yes, Robert, she murmured, her voice thin. Such a comfort. She subtly shifted her shoulder away from his touch. I focused on stirring my tea, the spoon clinking unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Every pat, every touch, felt like watching a spider crawl unknowingly onto a treated web. Another time, he brought over a new vitamin supplement he insisted she try. Doctor recommended Mother. Boosts energy. Might help with that tiredness. He practically beamed, the picture of filial devotion. The bottle was cheap, brightly colored plastic. Gran took it, her fingers brushing his. She examined the label with feigned interest. How thoughtful, Robert. I'll add it to my regimen. It went straight into the pantry with the hidden real pills. Later, when Head left, she handed it to me. Dispose of it, Michael. Thoroughly. Who knows what actual toxins he considers vitamins? The atmosphere in the old house grew thick with unspoken venom. Gran spent more time in her conservatory, tending her orchids with trembling hands. The vibrant blooms seemed almost obscene against her fading vitality. She'd talk to them softly in Latin, sometimes genus names, chemical formulas. Her sanctuary, her private farewell. I'd find her there, staring out at the garden, her expression distant, unreadable. Was it regret? Satisfaction? The immense weight of her terrible secret? I never dared ask. Dad's visits became more frequent, more proprietary. He started making lists, just getting organized, Mother. For later. One less thing to worry about. He'd handle her silver photograph frames, her collection of antique perfume bottles, running his fingers over the cut glass. He'd sit in Grandpa's old armchair, the fabric worn smooth by decades, and pore over financial statements, humming tunelessly. Oblivious. Utterly oblivious to the invisible miasma settling onto his skin, his clothes, his very breath with every passing minute spent in the house that was becoming his mausoleum. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning. Gran collapsed in the conservatory. I found her on the cool tile floor, barely conscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. Panic, sharp and immediate, sliced through the grim acceptance that had settled over me. I called 911, my voice shaking. As I knelt beside her, cradling her head, her eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain, but lucid, frighteningly lucid. Her thin hand gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Michael, she rasped, her voice barely audible over the sirens growing louder in the distance. Listen the lab cabinet, don't talk, Gran. Save your strength, I pleaded, tears blurring my vision. No. The word was a sharp gasp. Cabinet key around my neck, take it. Take the vial. The notes green notebook bench drawer. Destroy it. All of it. Before he comes. Understand. The urgency in her eyes was terrifying. She was thinking clearly, even now. Thinking of the evidence. Protecting the plan even as her body failed. I nodded mutely, fumbling for the thin chain under her nightgown collar. The small brass key felt cold, heavy with finality. The wail of the ambulance drowned out anything else she might have tried to say. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, hushed voices, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Pneumonia, exacerbated by her weakened heart, the doctor said. complicated by her age, her existing conditions. It was touch and go. Dad arrived, all bluster and false concern, demanding the best care, loudly lamenting the burden of worrying. He hovered by her bedside, adjusting her blanket, smoothing her hair. I stood frozen near the door, the brass key burning a hole in my pocket, the image of him touching her hair, where the excretion would be highest, making me physically ill. Every touch was a deposition of death. Gran drifted in and out, her gaze sometimes vacant, sometimes locking onto Dad with a chilling, knowing clarity that made him shift uncomfortably. She rallied briefly 2 days later. The crisis passed, but the damage was done. She was weaker, frailer, confined to a hospital bed at home with round-the-clock nursing care Dad reluctantly arranged, complaining about the cost within her earshot. The nurses were kind, efficient. Dad treated them like servants. He was there constantly now, a vulture sensing the end. He supervised the nurses. He organized her room. He sat for hours in the armchair beside her bed, ostensibly reading, but his eyes constantly roved over the jewelry box on her dresser, the titles on her bookshelf, the small Titian sketch hanging on the wall. This was the final stage of exposure. Prolonged, intimate contact in a confined space saturated with her presence. Her bedroom became the epicenter of contamination. I watched him day after day, his fingers drumming on the armrest of the chair Gran had spent decades reading in, his hand resting on the polished wood of her knitstand as he pretended to doze. His face close to hers when he leaned in to ask if she needed anything, his breath mingling with the air heavy with the scent of her medicines, her fading life, and the invisible, deadly tellurium compounds she exhaled with every labored breath. Gran slept more. When she was awake, she was often confused, drifting through memories. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when it was just us, before the nurse came in or Dad barged in with forced joviality, her eyes would clear. She'd look at me, and a ghost of that old, fierce intelligence would flicker. Once, when Dad was downstairs loudly complaining on the phone about the nursing agency, she gripped my hand weakly. "Is he?" she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. I knew what she was asking. Was he absorbing it? Was the plan working? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her. Not relief, resignation, confirmation. Her fingers relaxed slightly in mine. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the skeletal branches of the old oak tree against the gray November sky. "Good," she murmured, so softly I might have imagined it. The reaction proceeds as calculated. Then her eyes fluttered closed again. The end came on a still, cold night a week later. Snow had started to fall, dusting the world in a deceptive purity. The nurse had just checked her vitals and stepped out for a moment. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand, watching the shallow, irregular rise and fall of her chest under the blanket. Dad was downstairs. I could hear the faint murmur of the television. Gran's breathing hitched, then slowed, and slowed again. There was no dramatic gasp, no final word, just a gradual quieting, a subtle release of tension in her hand, a stillness that deepened until it was absolute. Her face, finally, looked peaceful. The lines of pain and the terrible, hidden burden smoothed away. She was gone. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the soft ticking of the carriage clock on her mantelpiece and the distant drone of the TV below. I sat there, frozen, her cooling hand in mine, the enormity of it crashing over me. Grief raw and overwhelming, warred with a horrifying sense of completion. Her battle was over. His had just begun. Then, heavy footsteps on the stairs. Dad appeared in the doorway, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand. Nurse just left. Everything he stopped, his eyes going from my face to Gran's still form. His sandwich slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft thud on the rug. He didn't seem to notice. He took a step into the room, his face draining of color, not with grief, but with a kind of stunned realization. The prize was finally in sight, but the keeper was gone. Mother. he whispered, stepping closer. He reached out a trembling hand, not towards her face, but hovering over the antique diamond brooch she always wore pinned to her nightgown. A family heirloom. His fingers hesitated, then brushed the cold metal, the smooth stones. He touched it. He touched her, even in death, claiming his prize, oblivious to the invisible, lethal legacy coating its surface, coating her. I watched him, a cold fury crystallizing within me, sharp as the to crystals Gran had weighed with such precision. He leaned closer, perhaps to unclasp the brooch, his face inches from her pillow, breathing in the air she had exhaled for the last time, saturated with the final, potent exhalation of her vengeance. The nurse returned then, gasping softly, her professional composure kicking in as she confirmed what I already knew. Dad straightened up abruptly, clearing his throat, a mask of somber respect sliding over his features, though his eyes kept darting to the brooch. Oh dear. Poor mother. It was expected, of course. Peaceful, at least. He sighed, a theatrical sound. Such a loss. Such a burden lifted. The last words were barely audible, but I heard them. He turned to me, placing a heavy, possessive hand on my shoulder. I felt the contact like a brand. His skin against mine, skin undoubtedly already carrying the first molecular seeds of his destruction, absorbed through countless touches in her poisoned heaven. We have arrangements to make Michael, he said, his voice thick with false sorrow and burgeoning excitement. So much to do. The funeral, the house, her things. He squeezed my shoulder, his grip tight. Don't worry, son. He'll handle everything. He would handle everything. He would touch everything. Sort her clothes, pack her belongings, sit for hours in her study going through papers, sleep in the guest room saturated with her lingering presence. He would immerse himself in the physical remnants of her life, unknowingly bathing in the toxic residue of her death sentence. He would absorb it through his pores, inhale it with every breath he took in the house that was now his, but which had become, through her brilliant, terrible design, his execution chamber. I looked down at Gran's peaceful face, finally free of pain, free of betrayal. Then I looked back at my father, already mentally spending his inheritance, utterly unaware of the slow, invisible fire she had lit within him. The fire that would smolder, undetected, for months, perhaps a year, before it began to consume him from the inside out. Fatigue, tingling, heart palpitations, a decline mirroring Gran's, but born not of age or illness, but of greed and a mother's devastatingly patient retribution. He patted my shoulder again. Come on, Michael. Let's go downstairs. We need to call people. Start making lists. He turned, already moving towards the door, his mind buzzing with plans for liquidation, for profit. I followed him out of Gran's room, leaving her in the quiet stillness. As I descended the stairs behind him, the brass key heavy in my pocket, the key to the lab, to the vial, to the green notebook containing her deadly calculations, I knew my own part wasn't over. I had to erase the evidence, as Shed instructed. I had to ensure her elegant, brutal equation reached its final sum without interference. And then I had to wait. Watch. As the brilliant chemist's final, slow-acting compound worked its way through the oblivious, greedy son who had signed his own death warrant with every substituted pill. Grandmother Lily's last experiment was underway, and the results, though delayed, were guaranteed to be fatal. The ultimate slow burn had reached its ignition point. The rest was just waiting for the ash.